as we've been through a rapid run through the wonderful world of WallCAP, and that took some practice saying that out loud. There's so many different elements to it, and I think that it's going to be great that we're going to talk to Rob now about how those have all sort of, I don't know, being expressed through the exhibitions that have been put on by WallCAP across the frontier. Exhibitions has not been a great thing during the COVID year because people haven't always been able to get out to see them, but I know that people have, and I know that people have seen them, and I've heard some really fabulous comments about them. Without any further ado, I would like to welcome, fresh from Disney World, Dr. Rob Collins, and who's going to talk about the exhibitions that have been produced by WallCAP over the course of the last couple of years in 45 minutes, Rob, I see by the programme. So I'd better not delay you any further. Go!
Okay, can everyone hear me and see me okay? Okay, great, thank you very much. So my brief today, knowing that you've already heard from Jane and from Ian about the exciting things that we've done with the excavations and stone source and dispersal, and you'll hear some fantastic stuff about the GIS later on tonight from Catherine, with all the sexy maps of Hadrian's Wall that she has on offer. So today I'll be talking about the exhibition work that we've been doing with a few different collaborating partners. So, sorry, slide's not quite advancing. There we are. Okay, so basically, I'll just kind of give you a little bit of an overview of, the exhibitions themselves, why we're doing them, what's the point of those exhibitions, and then I'll go into the 3 exhibitions that we've done in detail. So that's with collaborating and partnering with the Sill, with Northumberland National Park, with Tullie House, and with the Great North Museum. So why exhibitions? As I'm sure many of you are aware, WallCAP has not really been a museum-y project. We've been very much focused on conservation, particularly heritage at risk, as well as kind of better understanding how the wall relates to its natural environment, that stone sourcing and dispersal strand. But actually, one of the things that came up during our project design phase is we had some feedback from Lottery, from our funders, who were very strongly encouraging of including exhibitions and working with all the fantastic museum partners we have along Hadrian's Wall. So one of the decisions that we took, and kind of following through on that information, that feedback, was that we wanted to make sure we had that parity, that equality with the different sectors of the wall. And so we very strongly wanted to work, make sure we did some sort of exhibition work in the central sector, but also the eastern sector and the western sector. The other benefit of engaging with those exhibitions is that while the majority of our work is, very much volunteer centered and volunteer driven and talking to local communities, if you think about the audiences that go into museums, they can be very different. So, it would be working with schools, for example, requires a lot of time and energy. And if we were to work strongly with schools, we might not have as much time and energy to work with our volunteers. So, but schools go to museums. There's often school trips to museums. So it's a really good way to kind of tap into different audiences. Often young families will visit museums as well. So there's a lot of audience potential there in working with those museums. But it's also a good way to prompt us to think about the results that WallCAP has been bringing up and how that can feed back into a more general interest, as opposed to a more specified wall interest, which all of our volunteers are. So with that in mind, the 3 partners that we were able to work with is in the West sector, Tullie House Museum and Art Gallery. In the central sector, the Sill National Landscape Discovery Centre, which is managed by Northumberland National Park. And then the Great North Museum, Hancock, which is a bit more of a complex partnership in the sense that the collections are those of the Natural History Society of Northumberland and the Society of Antiquaries of Newcastle. The museum itself is managed by Tyne and Weir Archives and Museums, but the land is owned by Newcastle University. So that's kind of with a home team and a much more complex collaborative working relationship. And you can see on the map there where those museums are located, just to kind of give you a sense that we are trying to achieve that geographic parity. So if we start with the Sill, now, the Sill, in working with Northumberland National Park Authority, this is their new kind of discovery center. There is a dedicated exhibition space that we are able to use, and through discussion we were able to identify a time frame for a temporary exhibition. So one that was only intended to last a matter of weeks. We started those discussions actually very, very nice and early in 2018, but then COVID hit, and so we had to adjust our time frame quite a bit. And the other thing that we had to decide, besides the time frame, which was adjusted for COVID, was exactly what we would focus on there. And actually, the main focus of our exhibition there was on human-stone relationships. And so the exhibition was called Stories in Stone, and it ran from the 1st of July to the 6th of September of 2021. We don't have exact numbers, but we estimated there were about 5,000 visitors that looked through that exhibition while it was there. The other good news is that the materials that were generated and created for that exhibition are, in fact, retained and owned by Northumberland National Park. And so I believe there was some hope there that they would be able to be put on display again in the Walltown Visitor Center, the one that's at Walltown Park. So with that in mind, what did we do? Well, we wanted to very much focus on human-stone relationships, not least because Northumberland National Park is very much about the natural history of the region as much as the heritage. And the Sill itself is often focusing on the natural resources and natural beauty that we have to offer in the Northeast, in the center of England, really, central Britain. And so we wanted to really reflect upon how stone, as much as we see it as a natural material, actually how integral stone is in human lives, both present and in the past. And so because it was a temporary exhibition space, we had some limitations on what we could do with the space. So primarily that exhibition consisted of a number of panels, printed panels with kind of text and graphics, and that was supplemented by 2 display cases and one digital interactive station, I guess you could say, for lack of a better term. It was really an exhibition in 3 parts. So the first part was very much around highlighting geodiversity. So the panels at the beginning highlighted the I suppose the aesthetics of stone, and also the different physical and chemical properties of stone. And we made, excellent use of photographs. Many of the photographs were supplied by our own Ian Keel, who has a very keen eye for pretty geology. And also trying to relate that stonework, each individual stone, to its relationships between each other. So we're often used to thinking about stratigraphy and archaeology, but geology has stratigraphy as well. And in fact, the whole concept of stratigraphy is one that developed out of geology that was employed subsequently by archaeologists. And so one of the things which was absolutely fascinating, you can see in the image on the left, is a core, as it were, a graphic representing a core, as it were, cut through the geology of the central sector of Hadrian's Wall. And you can see next to that, sorry, I'll just adjust my pointer if I can, there we go. You can see next to this core here that you've got labels there that give you some sense of the chronology and how that geological stratigraphy developed over time, over hundreds of millions of years. Dealing with geological stratigraphy is massive time depth, as I'm sure all of you who've heard Ian Keel speak have come to realize. So you have to think in a very different sense of time. But actually, it was very useful in pulling that material together to help think about how do we communicate that time depth, that geological complexity that has created such a beautiful landscape that we get to live in. And so those graphics were then supplemented by a number of stone samples that Ian Keel also provided. So you could see those different stones in the flesh, in the raw, as it were, and not just from those photos. The next section was highlighting how stone is used in human life, both past and present. So there were 6 panels there, and in each of those panels had a bit of a theme. That first panel, the one on the far left, actually is a really quite simple graphic that pointed out how stone in geological material is incorporated in so many aspects of your modern home, whether it's countertops or in the mortar that holds the bricks, or just the clay that makes the bricks, for example, roof tiling, how it might be used in insulation. There was any number of examples there. Other panels looked at kind of monumentality of stone and how humans have celebrated different belief systems, whether it's a standing stone circle or building a medieval church. that stone is helping them to achieve that belief system and celebrate that belief system. But also right down to the present, in which the potential of geology to both contribute to our climate emergency, but also to help us cope with it. So, for example, thinking about carbon sinks, how we can use abandoned oil wells and such to pump carbon back into, CO2 back into, to try and make our planet a bit more livable in the long run. And supplementing those panels, we had another display case with just a small range of objects that just highlighted some of the stone tools or stone objects used primarily in the prehistoric period of this region. And those were loaned to us by the Society of Antiquaries in Newcastle on Tyne, with many thanks to them. There was another section that kind of showed change over time through maps, and unfortunately we weren't able to collect that. But one of the really evocative elements is in the final part of that exhibition, in which there were two panels, which was each made of 24 different tiles that just provided little stories, little vignettes really of people and objects in stone. So the people were people who have worked in stone either professionally in different capacities. So Ian Keel, for example, being a geologist, Natasha, whom many of our volunteers will have met, is a stone carver, is an artist. Marta Alberti works at the Vinalanda Trust, is often picking up and digging up stones, whereas Frances McIntosh is of course having to manage their conservation in display, as opposed to Ray, who just seems to get on really well with carving stones, one of our volunteers. So we wanted to highlight just that diversity of stories of how stone plays into a whole bunch of lives, both professional and hobbyist, as it were. And then just also, the variety in which stone is used in our region historically. This was a very successful exhibition. What was fantastic is if you just kind of stood back and watched as people walked through it, the designers did a fantastic job in creating a very provocative display that made people stop and engage, and you could hear people discussing what was said in the text and what was shown in the visuals. And of course, that's what you want out of an exhibition. You want it to stimulate something, some sort of interest. So it was only a temporary exhibition, but it was extremely successful. And I know the Sill were also very, very pleased that at the traffic that it generated in the visitor center. Now I'll move next to Tullie House. In contrast to the Sill, our work at Tullie House was to work on their permanent Roman gallery. And so this is the gallery, not the Roman Frontier Gallery, which is in the basement, that links over to Carlisle Castle, but on the first floor, which is part of their progression through history, the history of kind of Carlisle and Cumbria. What was great is that Tullie House was extremely enthusiastic, very inclusive, and we were able to do some consultation sessions with our volunteers. And so our volunteers were fantastic, as always, and we were taken through the galleries as they were then, and they could see kind of what the galleries looked like. They were able to comment on what they thought worked and what didn't work, and then also were able to provide some consultations and feedback on what they think would be ideal, what they would like to see in the galleries with some refurbishment. Now, one of the things that is a bit challenging, of course, when you're working in a permanent gallery, is that we can't just throw money at Tullie House and say make the gallery which is best for our volunteers. This is a regional hub museum which has to serve the greater public. It's also a key venue for families and for schools, and so any exhibition refurbishment that came out of that collaboration had to be suitable for everyone. And so that's what was done. And in fact, the exhibition opened in November of 2021, but it's part of the permanent gallery, so you can go and see it at your leisure, which I would strongly encourage you to do. Now, to show you what has been done there, one of the challenges of that Roman gallery is that actually it's quite a physically constrained space. There's kind of three distinct areas, and they don't necessarily have a natural flow through. So you can kind of wander about them. So it's an area that needed to be able to be approached from multiple directions. It wasn't just a linear experience to go through this gallery space. Tullie House has some fantastic collections, and part of the old gallery, one of the great things is that there were so many objects on display, but there was very little interpretation. So the aim was very much one of the consistent pieces of feedback from everyone, our volunteers and other commenters, was that gallery had to be more accessible to people of different levels of education and interest, so they could have a better sense of understanding what was being shown. And so that challenge was met spectacularly. So there was decisions made. So is a way of kind of being cost effective with the budget, there was a decision to use much more flat art, for example, panels and other kind of flat art to enhance interpretation. And I think this is a really effective, really evocative decision here, what they've done with the Roman altars. So as many of you will know, Roman altars are quite ubiquitous along Hadrian's Wall. There are many hundreds of them. And actually, after you've seen a few, people just tend to start walking by them. But actually, in that choice of using flat art, of being able to put illustrations against the walls, you can see very clearly how Roman altars would be used. And it makes you stop and think. It's a change of space, a change of color. And those scenes that were reproduced in art are actually replicas of scenes that you'll find in Roman era artwork as well. So the way someone is sacrificing over an altar, pouring a libation over that altar, and the smoke coming up from the top, or the scene to the right with the soldiers standing to either side while a commanding officer makes a sacrifice. So they're historically correct scenes, but actually it's something that will have a bit more resonance to a modern audience to say, oh, this isn't just a fancy rock. This is actually part of someone's life. And people are really very much at the heart of the story there. There's lots of research that shows that for most members of the public, people, individuals from the past really help modern audiences connect to things that are in display cases. And so Tullie House grabbed that by the horns and ran with it. And so you can see here, really nicely done, the evidence for very specific named individuals in Carlisle is up front, right? So those stones that are in front, and then there's reconstructions of what those people may have looked like set behind the evidence. But again, it's very friendly. It's not too childlike, but it's also not hyper realistic either. So it's something that has it's an art style that has a good potential for aging nicely. But this also then connecting those people to the objects on display. And again, this was done very nicely. So there's this display case here, which is just, a variation of objects, variety of objects that relate to kind of leisure time and entertainment along Hadrian's Wall, but very nicely using that illustration to show how that is done and how that is accomplished. So just showing a couple soldiers playing a game. The other thing I would point out, which is quite nice, is that commitment to showing that diversity of Roman Britain in their illustration of people, of men and women of different ages, different skin textures and tones. And also, actually, I thought what was great here is this depiction of a soldier off duty who's lost an arm. And so trying to get varied abilities and body shapes involved as well, which is just a very good commitment to diversity. And then the other ways that objects were displayed is more thematically, with a much clearer signage and interpretation. So highlighting, for example, how Carlisle is not just a town, but it's actually a productive center, how things are made there. People's livelihoods are in making things at Carlisle, but also as well, how many of those things are related to death. And so looking at the cemetery at Old Penrith and Broome, in the objects that were buried with various individuals. So I would highly encourage you to go to Tullie House, have a look through this display, especially for those volunteers who consulted. We're hoping to do an event in the near future in which you'll get a bit more of a personal take on it. But I would strongly recommend that everyone go and visit that. And the final thing that I would highlight that Tullie House also committed to is that Roman gallery was also a space where they talked about archaeology. And they wanted to retain that discussion of archaeology and effectively how we understand the past. And they've done that in a few different ways. So using coins, they've set up a timeline of the Roman Empire, but just using the coins and highlighting which emperors are when. And, I'm a sucker for a timeline. I love a good timeline. So, they're preaching the converted in me. But you can't go wrong with a timeline, especially if you're looking at dates all throughout the gallery. You can always go back to that. But also there's a very nice graphic for kind of talking about stratigraphy and the layers of the past and how we recover that, how we know what comes from when, but also highlighting important people in Carlisle and Cumbria who have contributed to that archaeological knowledge and how we understand the region. So it's not just a celebration of the dead things, as Carrie calls them, but also of the more recent and living things that help us understand those dead things. And then if we finish with the Great North Museum. So the Great North Museum, as I said, it's more of a collaboration in and of itself. Tyne and Weir Museums manage the museum and collections on behalf of Newcastle University, Newcastle Antiquaries, and the Natural History Society of Northumberland. And again, like at Tullie House, the focus here was on contributing to the permanent exhibition, specifically the Hadrian's Wall Gallery. Now, for those of you who've been to the Great North Museum, you'll know that the Hadrian's Wall Gallery is kind of the central mezzanine area. It's absolutely huge. With the budget that WallCAP was able to bring, we couldn't do the whole gallery, not a gallery that size. So we needed to kind of focus a bit more. And again, like Tullie House, because this was a permanent display, those changes needed to be suitable for all the audiences that the GNM served. So again, being very family friendly and school friendly and accessible to visitors of all ages and kind of knowledge levels. And one of the things that the GNM has in abundance is stone, a veritable treasury of Roman stone. The Newcastle Antiquaries has perhaps one of the most internationally significant collections of Roman stones anywhere in the world that all relate to the wall and cover, in fact, the entire wall corridor. I love the Romans, you know that, but even I confess I can suffer to death by stone when walking through that gallery. And so that was one of the challenges that we addressed in talking with the GNM. How can we try and mitigate some of that death by stone to get people to engage with those collections a bit more? Because, you know, if you've seen one altar, you've seen 100, or at least that's the impression that people walk away with. And so using kind of some of the newest technology available, the decision was that we would use laser projection to try and color in and bring life to those stones. And so that photograph is the section that was chosen in the museum, one corner of the museum. So we weren't creating a centerpiece, you know, laser light show with fireworks going off and lots of sounds, but something that could sit on its own. And this was the section that was chosen. And as many of you, I'm sure, will appreciate, altars have many challenges as well as many benefits. Roman altars as a material are quite beloved by scholars and experts because they have such a wealth of information. You've got those lovely inscriptions which contain, you know, names and all sorts of details about gods, you know, geography, often even things that tell you about dates. But there's also an artistic representation to altars as well, in terms of, you know, whether it's flowers or there's a depiction of a god, himself or herself, sacrificial implements. So there's, you know, artistic and textual information that comes from those altars. The difficulty, though, is that they are, well, generally, I mean, technically, they're quite monolithic, but they often look very repetitive for those who don't get into altars, so to speak. And the GNM, because they have so many, it's very easy to hit that saturation point. However, once you start adding lasers to things, everything always becomes cooler. And so this is what happens once you start adding lasers. So there were 7 altars in that corner. And this was based on research done by Louisa Campbell, the University of Glasgow, who did microscopic analysis and chemical analysis of various inscriptions and sculptures from Roman Britain, and has effectively, through her research, created a color palette of the colors that Roman stonework was painted. And so working with the designers, we were able to kind of, you know, establish that color palette that these altars would have. Now, we can't say that this is an exact representation of what the altars look like. This is a reconstruction, but it is using a historically verified color palette. And what a difference it makes to go from that to that. And what's incredible as well, because of the technology now, especially, you know, just that really precision, very nice, fine, high luminosity laser precision, actually, you can get very good detail. And so those lasers can color in the inscriptions very detailed, so it doesn't look blurry or fuzzy. But it is, admittedly, it's guesswork. But all those design motifs that they've incorporated, the wings here, the scroll work here, these rosettes, these flowers, those are all attested in Roman art. So there's nothing there that stands out is completely false or made up. It's all part of that milieu of Roman culture. But it also gives you a sense of kind of the color of Hadrian's wall. You know, next time you visit the wall or a museum, just kind of start imagining being surrounded by these colors as you look at the remains of buildings and other stonework. Not only do you have this wonderful kind of static color immersion, but there was also a commitment to use animation to bring more story work to those stones. So each of those altars has some sort of animated sequence. So they all start with that sort of thing there that you see, just giving it color, highlighting the Latin inscription. But there is a translation into English that gets projected over the Roman inscription, the Latin inscription. You then get some sort of animated scene that helps you explain what is happening with the altar. So this one here with Fortuna, the shot is taken in such a way that you've missed the rolling of the dice, as it were, Fortune being a goddess of fate and good luck. But also this, alternatively, depending on your reading, could represent the pouring of a libation of, say, wine over the top of the altar, or of blood, for example, if Fortuna was not with you and you died in the frontier during duty. Other scenes, for example, pick out the gods. So this one of Minerva, just, you know, her face comes up and there's a kind of a springing of life around her. This one of Jupiter here has a fantastic thunder and lightning crash through it. And this one of Neptune over here has a lovely kind of aquatic scene of fish, this kind of panel looking like a window into an aquarium with fish swimming behind it. It's all very vibrant and very evocative. And the entire sequence only takes 5 minutes. So you can watch the whole thing moving from stone to stone over the space of 5 minutes and then leave. Or you can watch a stone, go away, come back a few minutes later and watch what happens on another stone. But I can't gush about it enough. The designers just did such an incredible job with the brief they were given. And as someone who does suffer from death by stone, I could watch those all day. So it's really good in really poignant way of, I think, communicating with those different audiences. So the exhibitions themselves, the one at the Sill is completed, so I'm afraid you can't visit that, but I would highly encourage you to go to the GNM, to Tullie House, and look at those exhibits there. Those are lovely that we've been able to work with those partners through WallCAP, but also take those visits and that time to then visit the other museum spaces that we have along Hadrian's Wall and reflect upon those different messages that we get through our museums. What has been fantastic is the National Trust in English Heritage, the Nalanda Trust have all invested, Sen House as well, have all invested in recent years in refurbishing their museums and trying to keep sure that there's fresh messaging, there's new data, new information that's being communicated. And that's something that those museums absolutely should be applauded to do. It's not easy to make an exhibition, as all of us in WallCAP know, as we scrambled around at last minute to meet various deadlines and get the right images to go onto a panel and such. And the people that work on those exhibitions work very hard to make sure that they appeal to those audiences. That said, there will be challenges going forward. You know, as we find out more information every year, the question is, well, how do we convey that new information to audiences? And that's the things that we need to also consider going forward. How do we continue to make that information accessible and fresh and relevant for everyone? Thank you very much, and I'm very happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much for that, Rob. I'm sure there's a round of applause appearing in emoji fashion or in actual hands fashion. That was very, well, I'm just blown away by the multifaceted angles of WallCAP project that we've met today, and we're still yet to meet Catherine and her GIS this afternoon, which, as I say, I'm really looking forward to in that sort of sense. I know that it's been a difficult time for exhibitions with COVID and one thing and another, Rob, particularly with the temporary exhibition that you had at the Sill and people maybe being nervous to go into spaces during that particular time. Does any of that content lend itself to digital exhibition form, or digital exhibition format, or a sort of exhibition light as a legacy of the project, do you think?
Yeah, it's the sort of thing that, all those panels can be, they exist in PDF form, as it were. So it can be turned into a digital resource. The challenge, I'm sure a challenge that we all appreciate because of COVID is, we can engage with things digitally, and that's often good, but it sometimes loses that wow factor. And one of the things I think all of us working on that exhibition with the Sill, really appreciate is that we saw the excellent design work being done. We saw all the things being pulled together. We saw the final designs of those panels, but actually it was seeing them installed at like the 2.2 meter height they were at, that suddenly there was that much greater impact. So we always can try to make sure that there's some sort of digital availability, but I'm always slightly reticent of jumping too quickly to the digital, because there's a lot to be said for that in-person experience of things.
I'm going to go to the chat, but I'm going to indulge with a second question, which is directly to you, Rob. How did you enjoy working in the museums world for a bit, putting those exhibitions on?
It was nice. When I worked for the Portable Antiquity Scheme, I had my foot in the museums world a little bit.
Yeah.
So in some cases it was nice. In other cases, it made me realize that I like what I do now a bit more. I like doing the reading and the research, I should say. So, so the kind of the design decisions and things that had to be made.
Okay. I just thought I'd ask that question because I think there was you were really excited with some of the opportunities, and that's a classic line: adding lasers makes everything cooler. Quote Austin Powers, definitely.
Yeah, well, that's just a fact of life, isn't it? It's a golden rule.
It is. I'm going to pick up in the chat and move down to Steve Herod is saying he saw the GNR exhibition and thought that was excellent. That's just what you want to hear. In that sort of sense. And Lee, yes, go see them. Lee saying that it's been a prompt to get out there and go and see those exhibitions. And I haven't seen the GNM one either, so I need to get out there next time I'm over that way. Sandy was saying the GNM exhibition is very good and brings the altars to life. I stood watching a group of school children enthralled by the display. Well done. And that's something with, as Rob rightly says, there are altars and there are altars and there are altars. And yeah, they really, if you're not an altar person and you can't get access to that text that's on the front, they're just long, tall stones that hang around in Roman galleries, aren't they? And so I think anything that you can do to bring them to life is just amazing. And Catherine, yeah, I'm with you. It looks great, and particularly when Rob was showing us the animation slides, I thought they looked terrific. Yeah, looking forward to seeing them too. While we've got Rob here, this is quite a short session that we've got with Rob, but while we've got Rob here, are there any other additional questions? I should start by asking who's seen these exhibitions. Show of virtual or real hands, who has been and seen the exhibitions that have been put on by WallCAP over the course of the year? There you go, was 1, 2. So there's a lot of you to get out and about. Yes, consider yourself told off, and take it from me, because if Kerry starts telling you off, it's much worse, right? So go before that happens.
What I could also point to is Catherine has been fantastic in putting on social media some of the more videos and animated stuff as well. So if you want a bit of film teaser, as it were, there's some stuff up for Tullie House and for the GNM on our WallCAP Twitter account.
And when it came back to Tullie, and obviously you've got 2 Roman galleries in Tullie House, how much did you consider that one related to the other, Rob, in a way?
That was part of our discussion. They were very conscious that while it has been now more than 10 years since the Roman Frontier Gallery was installed, that the Roman gallery on the first floor had not seen any love in many decades, and that was the one that needed some TLC and some modernizing. For any volunteers who were at the consultations, I don't know if they remember, but the paint scheme alone, I think, was highly reminiscent of kind of Cold War public service buildings. So the the background paint kind of was enough of a warning that things hadn't shifted there. So what I will say is, Tullie took up the challenge with relish, and they said, okay, great, let's see how much we can accomplish with this budget and really freshen things up. And they did. They've done an incredible amount of work and have been able to change that entire permanent gallery space and adjust all of it with a relatively modest budget. So, Tullie House is to absolutely be applauded for the work that they've done in transforming that space.
Absolutely, and it was ready for a rehash, that Roman gallery space. Having worked on the Frontier Gallery, yes, it was. It did become all of a sudden the poor relative, didn't it, of the two? There's been a lot of comments come into the chat about people that have seen the exhibitions and thought they were wonderful, and a lot of promises to go and see them as well. So yes, you people get out there. David was asking roughly what was the budget for the 3 exhibitions.
So we played fair with each partner. Each partner had the same sort of budget that we were able to work with, which was £30,000. So I know that will sound like a lot of money. A museum, especially a permanent museum display, can eat up that money like that. Depending on the museum, you have to think in terms of square meters, and each square meter will often have a price tag of anywhere from £1,000 to £5,000, depending on what you're doing. So, that £30,000 could be eaten up within 6 square meters, for example. And in fact, that's probably about the case in the GNM in terms of having to purchase the 2 laser projectors and the kind of design work to map that on. Whereas Tullie went a slightly different way and broke it up. So they didn't invest as much in the digital, so they could get a much greater area coverage within the gallery.
Yeah. Exhibitions are an incredibly expensive activity to undertake, definitely. That's why a lot of galleries that you see and you think they really should be refreshed haven't been, in that sense. That's a pure and simple answer to that. I also like to play the game of walking through a gallery and working out when the meeting got so long that they started to get bored with the captions, which is always a great activity to undertake. And whenever I work on a gallery project, I always like to turn the gallery around and start from the other end to try and avoid that. But there's always a point where you get to the captions and you go, well, they got tired in the meetings leading to that. Catherine has put some clips and links in the chat to some of the video alters and things of that nature. I think that the 2 that are at Tullie and at GNM are permanent exhibitions, and so should be there, bearing in mind what I've just said about the expense, for quite a while in that way. It's just the one at the Sill that was a temporary, and maybe we can get that back up and running in another location, hopefully for 1900, how we've got the year of the celebration on. Barbara was asking, she enjoyed the Sill, but is there a leaflet, brochure or booklet by any chance? Almost like a curator's guide to the exhibitions. Is there any chance that there could be a little snippet of the curator's guide at some point? Maybe that's a digital asset that could come.
Yeah, possibly. I think we'll have to talk to National Park about that as well, because it's collaborative in that sense. So we don't want to step on any toes. We want to make sure we work in that spirit of collaboration.
Absolutely. And David, I'd agree that if you look at what they've got there for what they spent there, that's an amazing return on that.